doing, Ron?
Hey, Rob. Hey, Mike. I'm doing fine. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah,
Oh,
definitely, guys. Let me give me a second. And today's show, I think this is the 80 third show of the Rock Show.
wow.
And today we're talking about a very infamous and famous band. We're talking about Slade.
Definitely. Slade. Slade.
Slade. Dude, they had so many. Dude, these people had a lot of fucking hits.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they
And
were
they sold
huge.
50 million albums worldwide. I was like, holy motherfucker.
Yep.
These
Yep.
dude, they
Yep.
were good.
Let me introduce everybody to Ron Granger, who's our guest tonight. Ron, I want to thank you for coming on, okay?
Sure.
And let me give you a little background, everybody. I met Ron about 5 or 6 years ago. I used to go to school with his wife, his lovely wife, Donna. And when me and Donna got kind of like reacquainted after many years, we found each other on Facebook. She had pointed out how her husband, Ron, was very into music and we probably would like the same stuff. Well, yeah, it happened because Ron, you're a big glam rock guy and and punk rock, and you've been to some amazing shows back in the UK when you were growing up.
Yeah.
I wish I was about 10 years older. I would have been there with you, man. I mean, it's like, you went through the Bowie, T-Rex, Slade, Sweet, then into the punk scene. So you got some great stories. That's why I wanted to have you on.
Yeah, I was just lucky to be living in London and just having access to, so many great shows. And, back in the early 70s, literally, you could go to a show for $2, $3, $4, $5. It was that inexpensive.
Wow.
Yeah, and to this day, you're the only person I've ever met that was actually at the Rainbow Theater where the Ramones recorded "It's Alive."
Yeah, it was a great show. I think
Wow.
I was in the third row, and Ramones actually played an all-seater theatre. The Rainbow is a very famous London theatre, holds about 3,000 people.
Right.
Everyone's played there, from the Beatles to the Stones, and the Ramones. T-Rex played their last ever London show there.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it was New Year's Eve, 77.
Yeah, New Year's Eve, 77 into 78. Yeah.
Hey Ron, let me ask you a question. Were you big do you love the whole punk scene, or do you like the glam rock better?
You know what? It was a natural progression. I love glam. T-Rex are my favorite band. Roxy Music and David Bowie are my other favorite artists. I was just at the right age. And then, when glam rock kind of disappeared and disco took over, and I, didn't really find anything I could like in music anymore. And suddenly, punk came along. And the day I heard that first Ramones album, I can remember it, November the 22nd, 1976. Wow. I know it because it was my birthday. And I went to, I think, Virgin Records in central London, and I heard it. They let you listen to records there. I heard it, I bought it, and I tell you what, it changed my life. I couldn't believe how good it was.
Right. Well, what you just said was correct. I mean, glam rock, I should say punk rock, was a natural progression from glam rock. Okay, and that's something that we've discussed in a lot of shows. Punk bands that we've covered from that time, whether it was the Sex Pistols or the Clash, the British bands, they all looked back at the glam bands as influences. So today we're going to talk about Slade. And Slade is just one of these bands that, I mean, they have a huge history. They were as big as the Beatles at one point in England, it seems. And they influenced so many on both sides of the Atlantic.
Dude, they influence anybody from Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, Ramones, Sex Pistols, The Undertone, The Runaway. These guys influence all these guys.
And of course, Quiet Riot, because they love to.
Oh, yeah. And also Cheap Trick. I just want to throw that one in there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Cheap Trick is influenced by Slade.
And Oasis as well.
Oasis.
Yep.
Mention Oasis. Yep.
Hey, Ron, I got to tell you something. So I saw Oasis at the theater in Madison Square Garden.
I was there.
And I was there live, and the two brothers got into a fight, and one of them finished the whole show by himself.
Okay, I remember being at the theatre at Madison Square Gardens in 1996 and seeing Oasis there, but I don't remember getting into a fight. So maybe you saw them later on, but
No, I saw
Yeah,
them in the theater. They had them in the theater. They didn't have
yeah,
in the main Madison Square. This was in the
no,
theater, like with 5,000 people.
yes, well, I saw them too in the theatre.
And they got into an argument, and one brother left, and the other brother finished the show.
That happened a few times with those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Very.
All right, so let me give a little back history of Slade because it goes all the way back to 1964. Now, originally Slade, when they got together a little bit later, just so we all know who we're talking about here, it's Noddy Holder, who was on vocals, and he did a little guitar playing as well. Drummer Don Powell,
Yep.
guitarist Dave Hill, and then you had Jim Lee on bass. Okay. Now, drummer Don Powell and guitarist Dave Hill were part of a Midland group called the Vendors, and they toured on the UK pub circuit. Okay, and they already at that point. What were you going to say? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Ron. You said something.
No, it wasn't me.
Oh, okay, my mistake. So, this band, the Vendors, toured on the UK pub circuit, and they at that point in '64 they had a 4-track privately pressed EP out already. Now, at the same time, Noddy Holder was in a band. He was singing and playing guitar in a band called Steve Brett and the Mavericks. They had 3 singles out on Columbia in 1965. Now, the Vendors around 1965 would become more, they would go in a different musical direction than where they started. They would become more of a blues-based band, and it was because they kind of discovered Howlin' Wolf and Sonny Boy Williamson, and they would change their name from the Vendors to the In-Betweens. And they started supporting acts like the Yardbirds and the Hollies. They were into that whole British blues thing. Now, in '65, Noddy Holder's band, Steve Barrett and the Mavericks, and the In-Betweens happened to end up on a ferry together when they were both doing separate gigs in Germany. Now, Don Powell and Dave Hill, they knew Noddy from back home, the Wolverhampton area, and they asked Noddy if he would want to join the In-Betweens. But Noddy turned him down, okay, at that point. Later on, they would meet again in their hometown of Wolverhampton, and a short while later. But Noddy would be asked again, and this time he would agree. Now, at that point, bass player Jim Lee had already been recruited by Powell and Hill. So by '66, this new version of the In-Betweens got together to record a single of an old Otis Redding song called Security. And they also had an original called Evil Witch Man, and it was released on Highland Records. Now, another single, this time on Columbia Records, was called You Better Run. That was another cover, okay? You might know that song, Rob, like You Better Run.
Oh yeah,
Pat
I
Benatar had
definitely know that one.
a bunch of bands had a hit with that one.
Yeah.
Pat Benatar in America had a big hit in that. Now, their version of it is actually produced by Kim Fowley.
Wow.
From LA. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
involved with so many bands. We got to do a show on him. I keep saying that, you know.
Yeah.
Now the Slade spent most of '66, '67, and '68. I shouldn't say Slade. They weren't Slade yet. They were the In-Betweens. Okay, they were touring most of the UK. Okay, now Noddy Holder had a flair for being a frontman. This guy was a good frontman, and people showed up to the shows just to see the outrageous things that he would do. He was good at getting the audience riled up, you know, clap your hands, stamp your feet kind of stuff. Okay. And in '69, there was a local promoter named Roger Allen, and he happened to spot the band, and he mentioned it to Jack Baverstock, who was the head of A&R at Philips Records.
Yep.
Now, Baverstock brought the band into the Philips studio and offered them a contract to Fontana Records. Once again, Fontana comes into play, right, Rob?
Yep. Fontana comes to play all the time.
Yep. Now, but only if they would change their name and get a London-based management company. So this is how they changed their name. The In-Betweens, they didn't like that name. They were going to change it. They changed it to Ambrose Slade. Now, it was kind of, the name is interesting. It was kind of an in-joke between the band and Baverstock's secretary, okay, because the secretary named her handbag Ambrose and her shoes were called Slade. I don't know any more than that, okay? It's some kind of in joke. but that's how they got named Ambrose Slade. Now they also got a London-based manager at that point named John Gunnell, who would be with them for a little while. Now, Ron, let me ask you: do you recall the Ambrose Slade title, or it was like a little too early for you?
Yeah, that was too early for me.
Yeah, because they would release one album like that, okay? And it would be the debut album called Beginnings, and that came out in mid '69. There were two singles released on that. One song called Genesis, which was like it was really an instrumental, and then a song called Wild Winds. They had released two singles, Genesis, which was an instrumental, and then The Wild Winds Are Blowing. All right, both of those as Ambrose Slade, both of those bombed. But during the recording of the album, they were visited by the Animals bass player Chaz Chandler. Now, Chandler liked them right off the bat, and he offered to manage them. He had previously managed Jimi Hendrix, so they were impressed, okay? And the band would accept the offer. Now, Chandler would also impress on the band that they needed to do a lot more of their own material, okay, and then kind of get a little bit of a change of image. So right after he would team up with them, they would shorten their name to Slade. They would drop the Ambrose, and then they also took a skinhead look. Now, what do you think of that? A little off the wall, right?
Yeah, that it does sound off the wall.
Do you remember that look, Ron, at all when they had that?
No, I mean, Ambrose Slade, just weren't popular, and nor were the first incarnation of Slade either. I mean, their first two albums didn't sell at all.
Well, that's true. That's true. But that skinhead look at the time in '69, I know it was it didn't have the connotations it has now. Okay, there was no racist thing. It was a reggae thing. Okay,
yeah,
and wearing the big boots and the suspenders and stuff and the short hair. These guys were listening to a lot of Jamaican music, all that stuff, reggae,
yeah,
and that's what it was about. But Slade, took this image more as like a fashion thing because they weren't playing that kind of music.
yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, and I think it was really short-lived as well.
It was like a year at the most. Okay, now between '69 and '70, pretty much. Now, also the look was kind of associated with like football hooligans, right?
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, yeah, and also Noddy and Noddy and Don Powell, they were kind of tough-looking guys anyway, so that really didn't help.
Yeah, that's true. Noddy is, he looks like he's taken a few punches to the face.
So, yeah.
No, but it's true, and they wouldn't keep that look for too long. But,
hey, but Mike, let me ask you a question. Were these guys? They were like kind of writing their own shit, right?
They were starting to. Jim Lee and Noddy Holder were always the main songwriters of the band. Okay. Now, with that first album, I think there were a couple of covers on there and some originals, but I don't think they had that confidence yet that they could really write. So, like in '70, when they had this skinhead look, they would release a single of the song "Shape of Things to Come," which was from the movie Wild in the Streets, and it was originally done by Max Frost and the Troopers. Have you ever seen this movie, Rob?
Nah, I never seen that movie, man.
It's great. Ron, you ever see it?
I've never heard of it.
Oh, it's fantastic. I have it on DVD. I'll lend it to you one day, Rob. It's about it takes place at like during the hippies time, '68, and the kids start to take over the country. And like this guy he's a rock star named Max Frost. He becomes president, and he lowers the voting age to 14. Okay, Hal Holbrook is in this movie. The famous actor Hal Holbrook.
Wow, that sounds great,
if
man.
you ever have a chance to see it, it's great. But
what's the name of that movie again?
Wild in the Streets.
Wow, I gotta see that.
Yeah. And this was the hit from it. It was like a top 20 hit by Max Frost and the Troopers, which was the fictional name of the band in the movie. The Max Frost is the president. He becomes president after he's a rock star. But it's like don't trust anybody over 30. So kids are like killing people over 30 and stuff. It's nuts. Okay, but that single by Slade of that cover of Shapes of Things to Come wouldn't chart. It failed to chart. but they did manage somehow through, I think, Chaz Chandler's connections. They managed to get on top of the Pops and do that song. So Chaz Chandler would move Slade over to Polydor Records, and it was kind of in the belief that if they got on a high-profile label, it would kind of boost their sales. The original single from Beginnings, okay, called Genesis, since it was only an instrumental, they added words to it and kind of changed it around a little bit, and it became a song called Know Who You Are, and they would release that. But once again, it would flop. All right. So now we're working on another album. It was called Play It Loud, and it got released in November 1970. But again, it wouldn't chart. So even though the band was failing commercially, they were getting more and more popular as a live act. Chandler had been managing them for like 2 years, and in 71, he would suggest that they record Bobby Marchand's song originally performed by Little Richard called Get Down and Get With It. You know this one, Ron, right?
I do know that.
That became a staple of their.
Yeah, that was
lives,
always something that they had done live. Okay, actually, prior to recording it, it was part of their live act. So Chandler was like, "All right, you guys do that great. Let's take a shot with that." So they actually recorded it, and it got released in mid-71, and it became their first top 20 hit, getting to number 16 in the UK. So it was kind of in this period in 71 that the glam rock movement was started. And you had, bands like T-Rex. Bowie was working his way up. Slade would jump on this, okay? They grew their hair out. They dropped that whole skinhead thing. They grew their hair out long. They started to dress glam, wear makeup, stuff like that. Naughty always had a great look, the top hat with the mirrors on it. Right, Ron?
Yeah, I don't. That was his kind of iconic look. Yeah, that top hat with the reflective mirrors. I don't think Slade ever got to the point where they were wearing makeup. I mean,
I just like little things. I've seen, but not they didn't wear overly makeup like some other bands, but sometimes Sweet wore a lot of makeup too.
Yeah. Dave Hill had like glitter in his hair,
right?
But
like that.
I can't imagine. Yeah, Noddy in makeup. He just looked like.
Well, there's nothing. There's no makeup that could do him justice.
No, the ugliest drag queen ever.
Hey, look, it's a face only a mother can love. That's right. Okay. Now Chandler insisted that they quickly write a follow-up to that hit, Get Down and Get With It. So Jim Lee and Noddy Holder would sit down, and in a half an hour, they wrote the song "'Cause I Love You," and that song, the way the two of them together and the way they wrote it, it started this long writing partnership, okay, between the two guys, and it also began the classic misspelling of the titles of the songs, okay. So like when "Cause I Love You" is spelled COZILUVU, okay. And Slade was known for doing that, okay, with a lot of their songs. They would spell, and it used to drive the teachers crazy in the UK, okay, because the kids would be spelling everything wrong because of that. Did you do that, Ron?
Well, I do remember, even in the newspaper saying Slade teaching our kids to spell incorrectly, things like that. Yeah, but yeah, I remember that hit. That was when I first started getting into music, and I saw them on Top of the Pops, and Noddy had his flat cap, his newsboy cap,
Yep.
and his long sideburns.
Yep.
And of course, what was interesting about that single was that Jimmy Lee, who was, I think, a classical trained musician, he played violin on it.
Yes.
And there just wasn't many rock records ever that feature a violin as the main instrument. And I mean, that went straight to number one, and it was such a unique sound.
Yep, it would go right to number one, and it was a catchy tune with hand clapping and boot stomping, okay, in it. And it was.
You know what it was? It was a different sound. It was very lively, very like rock and roll, very like holy shit, what the fuck?
Yeah,
these guys are doing
they
great.
were, they were trying to capture their live show, okay, the live sound that they had, And they would do that very well through their whole career, and it was a signature sound of theirs, that
Yeah.
kind of stomping beat. Now, it would go to number one, like I said, and then they would follow it up in early 72 with another one called Look What You Done. Now, that would peak at number 4. Now, one thing that like I said, the live shows, Slade Alive would be their first live album, and that would come out in March of 72. That album got to number 2 in the UK, but it also did really well in Australia and was kind of making a buzz in the US as well. Okay. The live album, this is really interesting. The live album was recorded in front of 300 Slade fan club members at a newly built studio in Piccadilly in London. Okay. Now, in my opinion, I'm going to ask you, Ron, what you think about this. In my personal opinion, it's like I would put it in the top 10 best live albums ever. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they recorded it, I think, in a purpose-built, as you say, theatre as well,
Right.
with a good sound. It was meant to be. It was recorded with the intention of being a live album, and the sound that they get is fantastic on it.
Yeah.
It's almost unblemished. It sounds like
I don't think there's any overdubs on it. If there is, it's like minimal.
Dude,
Yeah,
let me tell you, that album is fucking fantastic. For a live album and recorded, it sounds like you're fucking there. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
well,
How good it
I mean,
sounds.
they recreated that live sound, and one thing I got to mention too is 300 Slade fan club members. Now, the Slade fan club was something that the band members took very seriously. Okay, they paid attention to their fans, especially the fan club, and it's something that would be with them through many years, even through times when they weren't that popular. They still had their fan club, so they were always very loyal to these people. Were you a member, Ron?
No, I don't think I joined anybody's fan club.
I was in the Kiss Army.
Yeah, that explains a lot.
That explains a lot. Yeah, it does actually. But okay,
you know what's funny? They spell like I spell.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, you do spell like them. That's true.
I spell like that many times.
Now, the next single was called "Take Me Back Home," which got to number 1 in the UK, but it also charted in the US. Got to number 97, which okay, it's not a hit, but they're starting to get a little buzz with the live album and then another single. Now, they would get their third number 1 later in the year when they released "Mama, We're All Crazy Now." That would be
That's a great song.
The third number 1 in the UK. Now, the third studio album, called Slade with a question mark, Slade, SLAYED question mark, would come out November of 72, and that got to number 1 in the UK and Australia. Now, Slade would also reach number 69 in America, and the buzz was starting to continue a little bit with them. Goodbye to Jane was released as a single at the end of 72, and it would peak at number 2. Now, the song that kept it out of number 1, do you know what it was, Ron? Do you remember?
1972, Christmas time.
The number 1 hit by elder statesman of rock.
By the tell me the artist. I can probably remember the song.
Chuck Berry.
Yeah.
Oh, my ding-a-ling.
Yep.
Yes.
My Ding-a-Ling.
My Ding-a-Ling
is the song that would keep that Slade song "Goodbye to Jane" from hitting number 1. I wouldn't mind that if Chuck Berry was keeping my record from number 1. I wouldn't have a problem.
Yep.
But you know what? I think "Goodbye to Jane" was much better than "My Ding-a-Ling."
Well, you know what? It is, but it is still Chuck Berry. So, and that was actually Chuck Berry's last hit ever.
And he's only number 1, I think.
Maybe number 1 in the UK.
Certainly in the UK, he's the only number 1 he had.
I don't know. Did he have any number 1s in America? I don't think so. I think it was close. I think he had top 10s. I don't know if he ever hit number 1. That's another show. We can figure it out. Now, but actually, the song "Goodbye to Jane" would actually make it to number 68 in America. All right. So again, a little bit of buzz.
Not a buzz.
By early '73, the monster single
Oh,
Come on Feel the Noise" would come out. Okay, and that would go to straight to number one, and it was the first time a single had done that since the Beatles released "Get Back" in 1969.
That's right. It was very special. I mean, that was something that the national newspapers covered. You know, the
Right.
first time anyone had gone to number one since the Beatles.
Even T-Rex didn't do that.
They never did it. No, I mean,
Yeah.
no one had done it up to that time. That just shows you how big Slade were.
Right, and it wouldn't be the last time it would happen. Okay,
that's true.
Now,
yes, Slade was pretty amazing. These guys were like rockers, man.
totally. Now, the single for "Come On Feel the Noise," it would only get to number 98 in the USA, so it was a little bit of a drop off right there. Okay, unfortunately, tragedy would strike drummer Don Powell in July of '73. He was with his girlfriend. Her name was Angela Morris, and they were in a horrific car crash in the Wolverhampton area. And the crash left Morris dead, and Powell was in a coma. Okay. The band's future was up in the air for a while because Slade refused to continue on without him. So a new single got released at that time. Okay. A song called "Squeeze Me, Please Me." And it had gone straight to number one again, just like the last one, just like Not Since the Beatles. Okay. But a Top of the Pops appearance was canceled, and that was because of the car accident that Powell had. All right. At the time, they had some gigs that had to be played, or fans would have been really let down. So Jim Lee's brother Frank filled in on drums, and it was one festival called the Isle of Man Festival that summer. And they did it because they just didn't want to disappoint the fans. Now, were you at any of these shows, 72, 73, Ron?
Yeah, the first time I saw Slade was, I think, the end of October 1972, and it was a charity show at the Empire Pool, Wembley, which was by then renamed the Wembley Arena. And the Wembley Arena was probably the biggest indoor arena in the UK, aside from Earls Court. Earls Court held about 18,000. Wembley Arena held about 9,000.
Right.
And most bands actually just played in regular theatres that held anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000. But Slade played at Wembley Arena, and it was the first time I'd seen them. There was two charity shows going on at that time. Slade played the first night, which I think was a Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it well. In fact, it was my first ever concert. Not only
really
my first ever Slade concert, my first ever concert.
Wow.
A band called Blackfoot Sue opened. They had a hit in the UK with "Standing in the Road," but not much else after that.
Right.
And then Slade played, and the next night, Sunday night, the second charity show was headlined by the Faces.
Oh.
And the New York Dolls opened for the Faces, and it was just a week before Billy Mercier died in London. Yeah.
Wow.
You were at that show.
Only the Slade show.
Oh, you weren't at the Doll show.
No, and you know what? I was really young at the time. I was probably about, I think I was 13. I think I just didn't know. I mean, there was no internet. It's like I just didn't know about the Faces and the Dolls show. Otherwise, I may have gone. But yeah, that Slade show was.
What was it? That was like at their almost. I want to say almost at their peak, pretty much. What was it like? I mean, the shows seemed really raucous.
Yeah. The Mama had been number one. Goodbye to Jane hadn't been released yet, but they previewed it. They said this is our next single. They played that. I remember, it was really loud. Fans were going crazy. I mean, Slade had primarily a male following. There was, there was a lot of girls. I can see that, but Slade were primarily a male following. It was, as I said, really loud. The crowd were pressed up against the barriers. And Noddy Howard's voice was, there was no faking that. He really had a loud
Yeah.
rock and roll, powerful
He was
voice.
just right. He was a loud. He was, he's probably the kind of guy like if you hung out with him, his voice takes up the whole room. He's a loud, raucous kind of guy. So he's a great front man in that way.
Yeah, Dave Hill is a really good guitar player. Yeah, I mean, the thing about Slade is, by and large, they played the same songs all the time, and there was 4 chords, 5 chords, and they lasted 4 minutes, and they knew their set really well, and they put in great live performances, and I can remember a lot of the set because it was similar to what was on Slade Alive. They hadn't released Slade yet, so there was no new material other than the singles, and they did "Hear Me Calling," which is I think Alvin Lee song. They did "In Like a Shot from My Gun," which I think was also in Slade Alive. "Darling, Be Home Soon,"
right?
The John Sebastian song. They played that. They did "'Cause I Love You," which was actually one of the few times I saw them do it because they never had additional musicians. So I don't think I ever saw them do "Look What You've Done," their second hit single, because that mainly featured a piano.
That's something they weren't going to bring out on.
And they did "Mama, We're All Crazy Now." They did "Take Me Back Home," "Get Down and Get With It," and I remember they previewed "Goodbye to Jane."
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible.
And they the concert probably cost about $4, $3 or $4 to get in. The band would have played for, in those days, never played for much more than an hour, maybe 75 minutes, and that was it.
Yeah.
You had a great time. You went home, and
that's perfect for me, man. That's why I like punk rock. I got no attention span.
Yeah.
Now, getting back to the history, Powell had this car accident. He had to have some surgery because of breaks to both his ankles, 5 broken ribs, and to this day, he still has short-term memory problems and sensory problems from that accident. He would recover, and about 10 weeks later, he joined the band in New York City as they recorded the classic single, "Merry Christmas, Everybody." Okay. And they recorded that here in New York City in the middle of like a fall heat wave that year. Okay. So the band didn't want to lose momentum. So they released, the record company released a best of album called Sladist. Okay. And that went to #1 in the UK and Australia in the first week of its release. A new single was released called "My Friend Stan." Okay. And I want to talk to you about this song for a second, Ron. Okay. The single was called "My Friend Stan," and it was released in late '73. It was a different kind of Slade song. It was piano driven. Okay. It didn't have, it wasn't a ballad, but it didn't have that stomping Slade beat of some of their other singles. Okay. But Slade, at that point, really couldn't do any wrong. And it would get to #2 in the UK and #1 in Ireland. Now, let me ask you, Ron, what do you think of that song?
I love it.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great song.
It is. And I have to admit, at first hearing it many years ago, I didn't like it. Okay. It just, for some reason, it just didn't feel like a Slade song. But after listening to it for years, it really grew on me. And it's actually, it's whenever I hear it, I'm like, yeah, that's just like a perfect song,
Yeah. I don't think it was, I can't recall them playing it live much.
No, I don't think like you said, it had the piano. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was something they probably weren't going to do live. Now, Christmas time of '73, Slade would release that Christmas song, "Merry Christmas, Everybody," and it would become the band's last ever #1 in the UK. The single has remained popular all of these years. It's been re-released a bunch of times, and occasionally it still charts. It's a great Christmas song. You hear it, every Christmas. I guess in the UK, it's really a lot bigger, right?
Oh yeah, I mean that is probably the most famous Christmas pop song ever recorded.
Now, my favorite Christmas pop song is "Father Christmas"
by the Kinks.
Yeah. I always love that one. But "Merry Christmas, Everybody" is great. I listen to it every Christmas, and it seems like they kind of drag Naughty out, right? Like every Christmas, he gets some kind of appearance, right?
Well, I'm not sure, what Noddy's up to, because, you'll probably come to this later because, he retired, at a very early age.
Yeah, he did.
As far as the music business is concerned, you can always get him get him to record an audio clip about the song because, it's provided his retirement pension.
Oh, okay, okay. I've seen him on TV though, like on some British shows. But
Oh yeah, he had a kind of an acting career after Slade.
yeah, he did a little bit of acting here and there. Now, in February '74, the band would release a new album called "Old, New, Borrowed, and Blue," and it went to #1. And in an attempt to break the American market, it was titled "Stomp Your Hands and Clap Your Feet" in America. But it failed to kind of break the top 100 in America at all. It really didn't make much of a splash here. So a new single called Every Day was released in March, and it got to #3 in the UK. And then mid-year, another single called The Bangin' Man, which was another like hard rocking song typical of Slade, got to #3. The second half of '74 saw the band considering a movie. They were offered many scripts to look at, but they ended up settling on Slade in Flame. Now, Slade in Flame is a gritty story about a fictional '60s group called Flame. Now, incorporated into the script, there's a lot of true music business stories that's kind of based on Slade's rise to fame, stuff that really happened to them in the business. Um, it's a movie that when you watch it, well, going into it, if you've never seen it, you think it's going to be like a typical kind of light rock and roll movie, but it's not. It's kind of like it shows the real dark, shitty side of the business. And Slade is, a band kind of playing themselves, even though they're called Flame. But I think the film kind of it's a very good movie, but I think it confused a lot of the fans because I think they thought they were going to get a rock and roll light kind of movie, a good time kind of movie, and it wasn't. What's your thoughts of the film, Ron?
Well, I really enjoyed the film, and I didn't really have too many high expectations because I'd seen a lot of rock and roll films, and I know what they're like. They're you're not going to get Oscar-worthy acting performances.
Not too often.
Yeah, and as it happened, going back to old New Borrowed and Blue, I really liked the the songs on it. I like the fact that they didn't sound like the previous Slade recordings.
Yeah, it was a different.
And yeah, and I love the music from Flame. It's actually my favorite Slade album.
The soundtrack.
So, yeah, the soundtrack. So the film was just a vehicle for me to watch the performances of the band. As a film itself, it was fine, but I love the soundtrack, so that's what really makes it for me.
It's interesting you pick it as your favorite Slade record because the single from the movie called "Far Far Away" that got to #2 in the UK and actually hit #1 in Norway is Noddy Holder's favorite Slade song.
Yeah, he's spoken about that a couple of times.
Yeah.
I've heard interviews where he talks about. I'm not sure if he wrote it in Memphis. He may have done.
Maybe. Now, the main theme for the film only peaked at #15. It was a song called "How Does It Feel," and it kind of some point at this as kind of the beginning of the decline of the popularity of the band. I don't know. Getting to #15 is not that bad, okay? But they were having #1s, #2s, #3s. So by May of '75, they released a new single called "Thanks for the Memory, Wham Bam, Thank You Ma'am," and that would actually do a little bit better than the last one. It would get to #7, and it was the last top 10 of the 1970s that they would have. So by mid '75, Slade were becoming a little disillusioned about not breaking in America. They were kind of like, like I said, there was a buzz about them over the last 2-3 years. And, some stuff would, you'd hear about them. The live album was critically received very well, but they just couldn't break through, and they wanted to do something about it. So in the UK, they were kind of seeing a little bit of a drop off of their popularity, and in Europe in general. So they decided to make a permanent move to America, and they wanted to kind of build a solid reputation based on their live shows, which is how they really got started in the first place in the UK, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in August and September of 75, Slade took 12 tons of equipment to America.
Wow.
Like, not exaggerating, 12 tons of equipment, and toured the remainder of the year and into 76 all over the United States. They played with Aerosmith. They played with ZZ Top. They played with Black Sabbath. They would occasionally come back to the UK for some TV performances, okay? But they were basically based out of America at this point. Now, in mid-75, Slade booked themselves into the Record Plant Studios in New York City to record a new album called Nobody's Fools. The album was a break into kind of a new musical direction for the band. They brought in soul singer Tasha Thomas to do backing vocals on a few tracks. The album had elements of country, funk, and soul to it. The first two singles are In for a Penny. The next one's called Let's Call It Quits. They were released in November 75 and January 76. Both went top 20 in the UK, but didn't make a splash anywhere else. The album would be released in March of 76, but got to number 14 and didn't make any impact in America at all.
Wow.
So the title track also with Tasha Thomas on it as a single bombed. All right. So Slade's UK fans began to kind of feel that the band kind of sold out for going to America and kind of forgetting their fan base at home. Now, do you agree with that, Ron? You were there. I mean, were the fans kind of pissed off?
I don't. You know what? They could have been, but I was just moving on to other music by then. I really liked In for a Penny, but I think that Nobody's Fools album was the first Slade album that I didn't buy. So I was kind of like, I just seen it through other bands like, T-Rex's output, got kind of sketchy.
Were you listening to stuff like Dr. Feelgood and stuff like that?
Yeah, I love Dr. Feelgood.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wasn't. I think I just started to move on.
Yeah, outgrew them a little bit. That's all.
Yeah, I'd outgrown them, and even I love Bowie's early hit albums like Hunky Dory, Ziggy, Diamond Dogs, Pin-Ups, but again, I wasn't a fan of the Young Americans, and I'd moved on from there as well. So, yeah, I was kind of disconnecting somewhat from Slade by this time.
Yeah.
And I guess other people were as well. I wouldn't say I was pissed off because they weren't playing. I think I was just moving on, and people were, and that's why their record sales were dropping. Were slumping. Yeah, dropping.
Yeah. Now the band would return to the UK after this American venture was seen as a failure, so they would come back. But live shows in the States were popular, and they were well received, but it just didn't translate into radio airplay for the band or really any commercial success in America. So they went back to England. Now, we were just talking about musical changes. Now, when they got back to England, punk rock was kind of the new rage at that point, right? And Slade was perceived as a little bit of out of style or a little old-fashioned. But Chaz Chandler didn't get them re-signed to Polydor at that point. He signed them to his own label called Barn Records. And the first single released on the Barn label was a song called Gypsy Roadhog. And that was January of 77. But because of supposed drug references in the song, it got banned by the BBC. And it would stall the single in the UK at number 48. There was a piece of graffiti. Now, maybe you saw this, Ron, in your time. But there was a piece of graffiti written on a wall in London that said, "Whatever happened to Slade?" ? And they kind of, someone told them about it and they thought it was great. So they used that question as the next album title, okay? And it was released in March of 77. Whatever happened to Slade? Chandler was said to be kind of disappointed with this record. Okay, he produced it with them, but he was disappointed with the songs. He felt that they were not really commercial enough, and the album did bomb. Okay, but Slade, after coming back
But you
to
know what? The
yeah.
album bombed, but it had critical acclaim. Like
Oh
the
yeah,
critics loved
yeah.
it.
No, the critics loved it, and I actually listened to it today. It was the first time I'd heard it in years.
It's
And
not a bad album.
it's not. It's not. It's just kind of like, I don't know. The vocals are a little different sounding. It's naughty, but it's not the same kind of style the way he did it before. But one thing that they would do when this album came out is they would like start playing small venues right away, and even places like universities and stuff they would play. The
But
punk,
Mike, you know why? Because like British punk was starting to listen to them. That album.
yeah. I mean, I think that the punk bands, and you could probably attest to this, Ron. I think the punk bands grew up on Slade and the glam, the glitter bands, and they didn't have a problem with Slade. But even though they were like a little bit, older than them, Slade kind of like got continued to play, and by playing in small clubs, I think that impressed the punks. What do you think?
Well, I'm not quite sure. Slade didn't get the criticism that the prog bands did.
Right.
But I don't know what happened to Slade. Whatever happened to Slade? That's a good question because unless you were the Who or the Stones or of that stature, almost every rock band just fell off a cliff when punk came about.
Yeah.
It was hard for them to get gigs, and the music press in the UK, that was all national. They come out weekly. The Melody Maker, Enemy, Sounds.
Right.
They were national press. They had readerships in the hundreds of thousands, and they were almost setting the trends. And they weren't covering Slade. It was just covering punk. I just you'll never find anyone. It's hard to find people that don't like Slade, but they're for that period of time, people just weren't interested in them. That's just
whatever outrageousness that they had was kind of like not as much as the punks were doing. The whole filth and the fury and all that stuff. There was a lot to write about. I guess maybe Slade was more just straight ahead rock and roll.
Yeah, and Slade, they didn't indulge in any bad behavior anyway. I mean, misspellings was about as bad as they got.
Misspelling a couple of bar fights and maybe one too many pints.
I mean, they weren't known for any drug indulgences or anything like that, as far as I'm aware.
So. The
band members never got arrested, So Slade were as newsworthy as their music, and it was great in the early 70s, and it was popular. But 99% of popular bands, see a drop off, and
you can't keep it going forever. Everybody has a drop.
Guys, you know what's funny? The better Spader they became, the less they got on the chart.
I never put that together.
I swear to God, man.
When they were misspelling, they were doing better, right?
Yeah, but now that they started spelling, it was like, what?
Wow. Now, in the spring of that year, they would release a single called Burning in the Heat of Love, and that tanked, okay? But a follow-up in the fall was a single called My Baby Left Me, But That's All Right, okay? And it was kind of like that song was almost a tribute to Elvis. Elvis had passed away in August, okay? And, the My Baby Left Me, But That's All Right. That's All Right, Mama. I'm sorry, I left Mama off before. That's the name of the song.
I never realized that was a tribute to Elvis. You know that?
Well, That's All Right, Mama,
Yeah, I never realized that.
Yeah, and that would go to number 32 in the UK, so it did a little bit better than the last single. But the following spring, in March of 78, they released a football chant-themed song called Give Us a Goal. Now, do you know this one, Ron? because they used
Yeah,
it
I
in
know it really
commercials.
well. I mean, it wasn't a hit, and
No.
I think by this time they were really getting desperate.
Yeah, I
for
think
hits.
right. They were trying to do anything pretty much to
Yeah.
have a hit, but that song's been used in commercials over the years.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I guess it's a Slade original, but I remember when it
It
came
is.
out, it just sounded familiar. It's probably got some familiar refrains in it.
Yeah, and just it had that stomping, that foot
Yeah.
stomping sound. But in August of '78, Noddy Holder was involved in a brawl with a bouncer from the Stoneleigh Club. Okay, it's a club located in Porthcawl, South Wales. You know where that is?
Porthcawl, yeah, it's probably near Cardiff.
Oh, okay, okay.
Porthcawl, South Wales,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it was the Stoneleigh Club. The bouncer's name was Desmond Brothers, and he got jailed for 3 months for breaking Noddy's nose. Okay.
Yeah.
And now Noddy had complained to the club owners at the gig the night before about Brothers and some other bouncers being real rough with the fans. And Brothers just attacked them, and they got into a brawl. And even though Noddy got a broken nose, he still played the next night. Okay. So in 1981, there was a single years later called Knuckle Sandwich Nancy. And that was just kind of like about that incident. More about that later, but Knuckle Sandwich Nancy.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Now, another single would come out called Rock and Roll Bolero, and that was released in late '78. Again, another commercial flop. They were desperate.
I
But
kind of like that song.
it is a good song. Okay, I have it on an anthology. It's a very good song. I don't know why it didn't do good. I have no idea. Music was changing, like we were just saying. So a new live album would come out that year. Okay, they called it Slade Alive 2, Volume 2, I should say, and it was kind of like recordings from the '76 tour of America and the '77 tour in the UK, a combination of both. Now,
yeah, I recall it. I bought it. I bought it when it came out.
Yeah.
It was probably the first Slade album I'd bought since Flame.
Really? So it was like a good year or two, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Was it just because it was another live album? You thought it was worth it?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, it had different material on from Slade Alive. So yeah, I bought it on the basis that I pretty much knew it was going to be great sounding stuff.
Yeah.
And it is a good album.
Yeah, and what I like about it is it's that kind of middle period, like that they were doing some of those other songs that they're not so famous for. In '79, it was a tough year for Slade. Okay, they had 3 singles released. One called Ginny Ginny, a song called Sign of the Times, and a song called Okey Pokey. They all bombed. They released the album Return to Base in October of that year, and it was the first to not be produced by Chaz Chandler. What was happening was Chandler was managing and producing them, but he started arguing with Jim Lee over, like, it went back a couple of years, actually from '77. It was kind of over creative differences in the band and, what would be the singles, what wouldn't be, just whatever direction they were going. They were at each other's throats about it. And he would actually sever his producing relationship with the band at that point. Okay. He was kept on as manager. They didn't want to lose them altogether. They had a good working relationship. But the album Return to Base was pretty much produced by the band. Or really Jim Lee. He did a lot of it. Jim Lee would be very, later on, he would just want to be a studio guy. After the band was done in the '80s, he just did a lot of studio work. The album Return to Base didn't sell well at all, except in one country. Do you know where it was, Ron?
No.
Belgium.
Belgium.
Okay, it went to #1 in Belgium. And their single, a cover of Chuck Berry's I'm a Rocker, also got to #1 in Belgium. So they were big in Belgium at that point.
You know what I always find amazing? Like a British band, if they don't do good, they go to somewhere else and they do good, which is amazing. Or they go to Australia, or it's amazing how that works.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the UK and the Australia scenes are kind of tied in, right, Ron?
Yeah, I mean, Australian music charts are kind of by and large made up of UK and US artists.
Yeah.
Actually, and that in the 70s that was true of almost any chart in Europe.
Really?
Yeah, you know, they were dominated by English-speaking artists.
Yeah, true. But you know, it's interesting how it caught on in Belgium, of all places.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So late in '79, Jim Lee formed this side project called the Dummies. Okay, and you know he was with his brother Frank in the band. They released 3 singles as the Dummies, but they got actually some radio airplay. But the problem was the sales suffered of these singles because they distributed the records. They had distribution problems. Do you recall the Dummies, Ron?
No, not at all.
I had to YouTube it, okay, and I found a couple of the singles, and it's not bad. It's not bad at all. It sounds like songs that could have been in Slade, I guess, you know. But it was just the Dummies. I don't know what Jim Lee was trying to do with that. It might have been that he wanted to see if his songs would sell under a different name.
Sure.
I think that's all it was. He was trying to sell songs on another name, try another group, see if they would go, and still no success.
Nope, didn't do well at all. Now it's interesting because it could have done well, but they had distribution problems. Another act around the same time was Johnny Thunders. Okay,
Yeah.
You know this, Ron, when You Can't Put Your Arms Around a Memory came out.
Yeah.
All right, the single was a big hit, but you couldn't find the record, and it was because they didn't press enough and they didn't distribute it right. Okay, what they had. So that's always something I always use that as an example of how you got to have all your ducks in order, man. They didn't expect You Can't Put Your Arms Around a Memory to be big, but they should have been able to distribute the record right too, So it didn't happen. But that happened with Jim Lee. So in February of '80, an interesting thing happened. Bon Scott from AC/DC had passed away a month before, and AC/DC was needing a frontman, and they actually went to Noddy, and they asked him if he would join AC/DC, and he turned them down. He said, even though Slade's not doing that good, I'm still loyal to that band. I'm not going to join it.
Dude, imagine if he would have joined that, AC/DC would have still been the same thing.
Well, they were but they actually still were.
Yeah.
But I mean, even if they would have got Holden or the other guy, I think it would have still been they still would have been very popular.
I mean, Brian Johnson. I mean, and Noddy are kind of similar in a way, right?
Yeah, they're very similar.
Yeah.
And also, Geordie, when the Brian was, the lead singer for, I mean, they were virtually a Slade copycat band, I think.
That's right. I've heard like 1 or 2 songs from them. They do sound a little bit like Slade. Yeah, it's true. In mid-1980, they released their first EP called 6 of the Best, and it was 3 tracks from the Return to Base album and 3 new songs. It was sold at like a cut rate price just to try to increase the sales, but it didn't chart at all, okay? The band decided at that point to kind of stop working together. It wasn't exactly a breakup, but Dave Hill, they were actually hurting a little bit financially too. And Dave Hill would take on this side project, a job of like driving couples to their weddings in his Rolls Royce.
Wow, that's
okay. Yeah. And he only did it one time, and it was with members of the fan club that were getting married. So that business didn't take off for him, unfortunately.
But I was going to tell you a few things about some of the live shows I saw.
Go ahead.
Around this time, because after that Wembley show in '72, I did see Slade at places like Hammersmith Odeon, a few times at their peak. But some of the more memorable shows were where they, their sales had dropped off. They weren't the live draw anymore, even though they were always fantastic live. And I saw them at Wembley again in 1978, and there was there used to be an annual music festival called the Great British Music Festival. It was an indoor festival. It took place at Wembley Arena and also sometimes at Olympia in London. And I remember going in '78, and Slade were billed as the special guest, but they were only actually third on the bill.
Oh,
They were behind the Jam, who headlined,
yep.
and Generation X.
Oh,
And it was like it was kind of weird seeing Slade play this place, and it wasn't sold out, I believe. So now Slade are third on the bill um, at a show which isn't sold out. 6 years earlier, they topped the bill and sold it out.
wow.
But yeah, and then '79, they played. They were on tour then. They were probably playing some of the university shows that Mike just mentioned, and they played a ballroom in North London called the Royalty Ballroom in a little suburb called Southgate, and probably holds about 1,500. I remember just driving there on the spur of the moment because it was only about 25 minutes away, and probably paying about $5 to go and see them then. And then Mike mentioned Dave using his Rolls Royce to ferry wedding guests around. Well, early in 1980, the last time I saw Slade, they played the Marquee Club in London. Marquee's famous for launching the careers of the Stones, Yardbirds, so many bands, The Who.
Yep.
And now, Slade had played there on their way up in 1970. Now March 1980. So I think about 3-4 months before they played the Reading Festival. My brother and I went to see them at the Marquee, March 1980, and it was sold out, but it only holds 400 people. It's a long way short of the 9,000 that they played at Wembley. And of course, their most famous concert, I think every major band has that concert where they know they've really made it. And Slade sold out Earl's Court in 1973 and played in front of 18,000 people. Now they're playing in front of 400, and their set list was interesting. They were still playing. They still played "Hear Me Calling." I think I said it was Alvin Lee. It might have been, not sure if it was 10 years after or Alvin Lee. Okay. I can't remember now. They played "My Baby Left Me," which Mike had just mentioned, and a few of their more later songs. They still did a few of the hits, but they ended up with "Born to Be Wild," which they played on Slade Alive, and it was a fantastic show. I remember it was hot in there. The temperatures were over 100 degrees. There's no such thing as air conditioning in the UK then, and the crowd were just rammed against the stage. They were still putting off fantastic live shows.
Yeah, I mean, that was a continuous thing through their whole career, the live show. One thing too, and you kind of proved it right here, is they would be rise to fame, and then the decline of their popularity, but they still kept playing, they still kept performing, and still recording. And it just, to me, it's really just, I mean, it's a great story about your tenacity to keep going. You know what I mean? I mean, these guys, they love their fans. They love to play. They could have hung it up in 75 or 74. Okay. Never seen them again. And they would still be great, but they wanted to keep playing. And you mentioned the Reading Festival. Okay. And I want to talk about that because that would be very pivotal for them. Now, the Reading Festival in England was in August of 1980. And what happened was Ozzy Osbourne, was supporting his new album, The Blizzard of Oz, and he had to pull out of the festival. Okay, his band had a problem, and he had to pull out. So they were scrambling for a band, and Slade was available, so they agreed to play. But Hill didn't want any part of the show. He didn't want to play. Okay, Chaz Chandler was brought in to pay him a visit, and the other guys couldn't convince him. So Chandler said to him, if you don't want to be in the band anymore, at least do this gig and you'll go out in front of 65,000 fans. Okay, so he actually agreed to that. All right, and the members of the band were almost going into that show. I don't think they told anybody, but it was going into the show as like this could be a farewell show. Okay, and what happened was when they got on stage and they played, they blew everybody away. It was like an amazing. I mean, the crowd went nuts. Okay, and the musical press started talking about him again. The performance was rebroadcast a few times, and everybody was talking about how great Slade was. So, they were not going to break up. Okay, and afterwards, the band would actually sign to Cheapskate Records, and that was owned by Chandler, Jim Lee, and his brother Frank Lee. And by doing that, it kind of like gave them a lot of creative control over their music. And the band then, to keep the momentum going, hurriedly released an EP called Alive at Reading, and also one called Christmas Earbender. Both did pretty well. And Polydor, their old label, recognizing the hype that was starting again with them, put out a greatest hits, called Slade Smashes. And that album was heavily promoted, and it got to number 15 and would go gold by December of that year.
Wow.
So that was just the greatest hits, okay? Now, aiming at the kind of new heavy metal scene that was starting, Slade would release a song called We'll Bring Down the House. And it was a very like heavy rock song, and it would hit number 10 in the UK. It was their first top 10 of the new decade. And an album of the same name, Will Bring Down the House, would peak at number 25. A new single called Wheels Ain't Coming Down was released to kind of keep that momentum going, and it would get to number 60. It still kept Slade in the public eye, even though it only got to 60. But they were also writing new material and planning an extensive European tour. Now, the next single would be Knuckle Sandwich Nancy, which harkens back to the brawl that Noddy Holder got into with that bouncer. It was released as a single, but Chandler didn't want to release it, and didn't like the song, didn't think it was worthy to even promote it, The band wanted it released, so they actually, what would happen is they would release it on a different label also, which kind of pissed off the band that they had to go about and do that. But in the end, Chaz Chandler would sell his share of the Cheapskate Records and kind of like let Slade manage themselves. And, he was kind of like not with them anymore at that point. And before he would leave them, he would stay on to manage a little bit. But before he would leave them entirely, he got them a good record deal with RCA Records. And the band's first full release on RCA was a European hit single called Lock Up Your Daughters. Do you remember this song, Ron?
Yes, but I was never a fan of Slade's heavy phase.
Yeah, the heavy phase. Yeah, I have to admit, as I was about 13 at that point, and I was listening to it, but I was aware that they had like an older career, but I liked it. The little bit that I heard, I would hear here and there. It was hard to, I knew a little bit about them at that age, but the first hit single was Lock Up Your Daughters, and it got to number 29 in the UK. Now, by November of 81, the album Till Death Do Us Part was released, and it got to number 68. It was their heaviest album of their entire catalog, I think, really. Like, if you listen to some of the later stuff they did that was more geared towards metal, I think this album was the heaviest. It would get to 68 only, but they did have some controversy with it because of the album cover. Do you remember this album cover, Ron?
Not really.
It was an ear with a nail going in it.
Yes, I do recall it.
And certain stores in the UK like wouldn't carry it because of that. So, they dealt with it, I guess, it wasn't really banned, but it was like not carried everywhere. Years later, when it came out on CD, they would change the album cover. and it would be like the band in kind of like a flame, pictures of them in a
Yeah.
flame. But the first single from Till Death Do Us Part was a track called Ruby Red, and it was the opening track to the album, a song called Rock and Roll Preacher, that when it was released in Germany in April of '82, it made a splash. Okay, I love that song, Rock and Roll Preacher. That's a great tune, and that was like a track that they brought right to their live show. It used to open the show. Okay, and there's a good live performance. I think it's on Top of the Pops of them doing that on YouTube if you ever want to look at it. A few more singles that year came out, but they failed commercially. And a third and last Slade live album was released that year called Slade on Stage. And it was well received by the critics, but it only peaked at number 58. So
I did buy that as well.
Did you?
And I liked it. Yeah, I mean, pretty faithful renditions of some of their later singles.
It's interesting. I think you could, if you just bought the 3 live albums that they have, never heard the studio stuff, they would still be great.
Yeah.
They would.
Oh yeah, without question.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, really, how they were able to pull it off and get that live sound on vinyl like that. So you did buy that, Ron, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay. Now, by '83, Slade was having some minor success with RCA, but the label had big expectations for them. Okay, and they would send them away actually sometimes to write songs. They came back to the label with 2 singles to produce for them, and it was a song called "Run Run Away" and a song called "My Oh My." "My Oh My" was a ballad, all right, and an early demo of it had RCA, ecstatic, and the "Run Run Away" song was like a Celtic sounding kind of tune, okay, very catchy, and that would be a big hit too. Now RCA brought in producer John Punter to work with them. He had success with Roxy Music and also Procol Harum and some other British bands. But Punter was the first producer to work with them other than Chandler. So they only had Chandler or they did things themselves. And he had kind of a different recording method than what they were used to. What he did was what a lot of producers do really is they record you separately. Okay, they were used to recording all together in the same room, and some producers don't like that. If you ever seen one on one, right, the Sympathy for the Devil movie with the Stones, Ron?
Yeah.
Okay, you know how they're all kind of separate.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's the kind of style that he did, and the band got used to it, but Noddy never liked it. He felt it kind of messed with their chemistry too much. But the power ballad "My Oh My" was released as a single in November of '83. Now by Christmas, it got to number 2 in the UK and also was doing well across Europe, particularly in Scandinavia. The new album was called The Amazing Kamikaze Syndrome, and it would be co-produced by Lee and Punter, and that got released in December of '83. The album, after a couple of weeks, was only at number 74. It was kind of stalling in the charts. So in order to kind of kickstart the album sales, they released another single, and that was Run, Run Away in January of '84. Now, that single will get to number 7 in the UK and push the album to number 45. So it knocked it up like almost 30 points. It would eventually go to number 1 in Sweden and Norway. They were pretty big in Scandinavia. While the 2 singles and the album rose up the charts, the band would be touring the UK heavily, and it would be their last like real UK tour that they would do. Okay. In late '83, Noddy Holder would produce the female rock band Girls School album. Okay, Play Dirty. You familiar with this album, Ron?
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's the album that they do 20th Century Boy. They do a great cover of that T-Rex song. But they also do 2 Slade songs on that album, Burning in the Heat of Love and High and Dry. Okay. I love that. I love Girls School. I think they're like such an underrated band, and I really appreciate it that much. But they would just kick ass,
Yeah, I'm sure I saw them. I'm trying to think if when I did see them, they may have supported
I was
Motorhead.
just gonna say you probably saw them with Motorhead because they
Yeah.
did that tour together. It was called what? Head Girl, right? Head Girl.
What year was it?
It
What
had to
year was
be
it?
like 83.
Yeah, I think I may have seen the London show at the Lyceum.
Yeah,
But,
the tour,
I don't think,
they called themselves Head Girl, and it was just the two bands, Motorhead and Girl School.
yeah,
Yeah, cool. I wish I could have seen that, man.
that was the Motorhead London Lyceum show I saw round about them. Still the loudest concert I've been to.
I'll always say Motorhead is the loudest band I ever heard. You'd be deaf for 2 days.
They were the loudest band.
Did you ever see them, Rob?
I saw them at a WrestleMania. They played the song for Triple H.
Oh yeah, I remember you told me that. I saw them at BB King's one time in the midnight, and I was deaf, I think, for like 5 days. It was like because I bought like a VIP seat, okay, and I was pretty close to the stage, and it just was like, so loud. But they were known for that, Now in late '83, speaking of metal bands, okay, Quiet Riot would release the album Metal Health, and they did their cover of Slade's "Come On, Feel the Noise." Now that was kind of like America's reintroduction to Slade in a way, or maybe even an introduction because they never really quite made it here at that point. But "Come On, Feel the Noise" was a classic Slade song, and they get to number 5 here because of the success of Quiet Riot. Slade's cover of the Slade cover, CBS would re-release. They would release Run Run Away here in the States, okay? And, that was the break, okay? It was actually somebody covering their song, hitting the top 10, that got them to have a single here hit the top 20, okay? It got to number 20. It stayed in the top 100 for 17 weeks. It was Slade's only top 20 in America, Run Run Away, and a lot of it really had to do with the video. Do you remember the video for that, Rob? Or Ron, either one?
Yeah, I do remember it. Yeah,
it was
yeah. That was kind of kind of UK's reintroduction.
Yeah,
to Slade as well.
Yeah,
My Oh My and Run Away. It's been a few years. They had top 10 hits.
True. Now it was filmed at Eastnor Castle, okay, in England, and if you remember, the video had like them playing like live out front, and then there's all these people trying to storm the castle. It's a great video. It's like very light, it's like silly, like they're making faces and stuff. Nadi's making these faces in the video and everything when he's playing. But I mean, it really was like a reintroduction, I guess, for the UK. And for me, I love that song. I mean, it got heavy rotation on MTV. Anytime it came on, man, I was watching it. I love that.
Yeah, my only problem with the song was I thought it just sounded so much in the style of Big Country. Big Country in
yes.
Big
Yeah, you're right. I never thought of that, and I'm not a big country fan, thank God. But oh man, yeah. I mean, look, Slade always, through the career, you could tell sometimes when they were trying to have a hit, But I think it's a catchy song.
It's a great song. Yeah, it's a great song. But I think,
they were doing a little Big Country ripoff. Okay, I'll give that.
Yeah, we were talking about how they were desperate for hits, and
was that the song that the guy had like a big log that he's trying?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that brings so many memories.
Big bald muscle guy, and he takes the log to break down the door.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Now, in August of '84, okay, My Oh My got released in the United States as a follow-up to Run Run Away. It also had another memorable video. That's a cool video. It's like, did you ever see it, Ron? The video for that one?
I don't remember it, Mike.
Yeah, it wasn't as big a hit here. It only got to number 37, but the video got some airplay. It was like kind of like a testament to them being a band. Like there's like, you see them get on a flatbed truck, and like Nadi's like hitchhiking in the middle of like Kansas somewhere, like in the weeds. and the cornfields or whatever. And he gets picked up, and then they start playing on this like flatbed truck, and then like everybody's watching them, and they get in. There's a lot of girls, and they're all just like, they got scarves, and they're like, like doing the my oh my dance, But I always like that song. It's a good, it's a power ballad. It's a good song. But Quiet Riot would release another Slade song that year. They released "Mama, We're All Crazy Now." Okay, so I never understood why Quiet Riot had to do two Slade songs, but I guess it's good for the band.
That's what worked for them.
I guess. What do you think, Ron? You like those two versions of Slade or no?
No, I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
The songs are so great that it's hard to mess them up.
They're not.
But,
yeah, I mean, they're right. I mean, if you do it pretty much like Slade would do it, when they did, they kind of did. They threw in a few more leads and stuff.
Yeah.
In the solos and stuff, but it was. I mean, I do like that. I do like those two songs when I hear it, but I don't go out of my way to listen to it. But now Slade needed to release a new album in America, so the Amazing Kamikaze Syndrome got reworked with a few different tracks added and a new album cover. It was also renamed called Keep Your Hands Off My Power Supply. And it would get to number 33 in the U.S. and number 25 in Canada. The single Slam the Hammer Down would make it to number 92 on Billboard. It was those three singles, My Oh My, Run, Run Away, and Slam the Hammer. Sadly, a tour with Ozzy Osbourne would have to be canceled because Jim Lee got ill. He got diagnosed with hepatitis C, and he collapsed after a warm-up gig opening for Ozzy one time. And the band would return to the UK and not tour again, kind of due to differences within the band and personal problems Holder was having. He was going through a messy divorce. In mid-'84, Slade's Greats was released, Greatest Hits, and a full European tour was planned, but it was planned without their approval. And Holder canceled the whole thing because he found out they were like selling tickets already, and he hadn't committed at all. Even the band really hadn't committed, okay? And somebody was selling tickets, and he squashed the whole thing. And he was pissed off because he was going through this divorce, and also no one even like came to him about this tour, okay? So in late '84, a new power ballad single similar to My Oh My was released. It's called All Joint Hands, and it was released only in the UK. It got to number 15. Do you remember this one, Ron?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I again.
Not listening to it, right?
It was okay, but
Yeah.
it wasn't as good as I think My Oh My was a better song, and
I'll agree with
so
that. I'll agree with that. It sounded the same anyway. It was very similar. In '85, they released three singles. One called 7 Year Bitch, one song called Mysterious Mr. Jones, and then Little Sheila. Okay, they only got like some moderate European success, but Little Sheila was released in America and it got to number 86 on Billboard. There was a video with that, I believe, and it did well in Canada and Germany, where it got to number 50. Later in '85, a new album called Rogues Gallery was released, and it's kind of like a keyboard-oriented album. It's really very, produced, very polished sounding, and Lee actually plays most of the instruments on the album. It didn't make a splash anywhere except in Norway, where it got to number 5. You ever hear this album?
I've not heard it. I think in 1985, the Smiths just didn't leave my turntable. So
yeah, that was the time for the Smiths.
Yeah, the Smiths were good.
I never heard anything off this album until today. Okay, and I listened to it, a couple of songs, and definitely was not impressed, I have to say. Okay, so clunker on that one. In November of '85, a party album called Crackers, the Christmas Party came out. It got to number 34. And then they re-released Merry Christmas, Everybody again. And that would get to number 48 in the UK. So for the next, that's the main crux of the band right there by November of '85. Because for the next 35 years, the band would reappear every so often with some new singles. Sometimes they would do reworkings even of old songs. And I don't know if you were aware of this, Ron, but like they've released some of their old songs almost as house music.
No, I didn't. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Not my thing, but like in some of the clubs and stuff, you could get like these remixes of Slade songs done like dance music. I don't get it, but all right, it makes them some money, I guess. And Jim Lee, he wanted to produce and do kind of studio work, which he still does. Noddy Holder pretty much hung it up by 1990 with any real performing. Slade 2 is interesting. It would be started by Hill and Powell, and it would feature different musicians. They had a different singer. Noddy Holder actually kind of gave them their blessing. He named them Slade 2, but Lee wasn't happy about it at all. He didn't want anything to do with that band. They would record one album in 1997 that bombed. Okay, the original Slade did reunite though for two events in 1996. One was the funeral for Chaz Chandler, and one was for an episode of the TV show This Is Your Life, which featured Noddy Holder as the subject. I've actually seen that episode. Ron, do you recall that?
I think I've probably seen it on YouTube as well.
Yeah. I mean, he's like sitting there and they're going over like different things of his life, and then the band comes out and they end up playing. I was going to say is many compilations and greatest hits and anthology records have come out over the years. In '99, the BBC did a thorough documentary on the band called It's Slade, and it featured kind of contemporary artists at the time, like Noel Gallagher from Oasis, praising the band. In 2002, Slade 2 would change their name back to Slade and record and release some new material. I'm surprised they didn't get sued. Okay, I don't think there was ever a lawsuit or anything like that. But in the past, when bands have done this, members, it usually ends up in a lawsuit. In late 2006, UK chart rules would change, and it would allow downloads of old singles to chart. And every year since then, Merry Christmas, Everybody hits the top 75. Did you know that, Ron?
I know it's been hit about 15 times.
Yeah, it's actually hit the top 20 once or twice in those years.
Yeah.
Powell in 2013 wrote a book called "Look What I Done: My Life in Slade," an excellent book. It was kind of based on journals that he wrote after his accident. Okay, because of his short-term memory loss, he writes everything down. Okay, and he documented, the whole time pretty much. Noddy Holder wrote a good book too in 1999 that I have. It's called "Who's Crazy Now," and that's a story of his life, like from when he was a kid until 1990. And that's a good read. You ever read that, Ron?
No, I haven't. No,
Yeah,
but I'll have to look out for it.
Yeah. So that's all I got today.
What's really interesting, Mike, is that the band stopped playing in about 84 was the last time they toured together. 85, and Noddy was about 38 then, something like that.
I don't even think he was 40 yet. Yeah.
Wow. So he basically he stopped playing live before he was 40, and the band broke up in 1990 when he was probably maybe 43, 44.
44 maybe, yeah.
He retired from basically from the music business at 44, which is quite amazing when you think that people just seem to go on forever now.
Yeah, well, people do go on forever. They go on too long sometimes. Okay, yeah. Then it starts like eating away at the legacy. Like we've brought it up a couple of times. Like, well, what would it have been like if like Jim Morrison had lived? Okay, do you think the Doors would still be a band, or what do you think, Ron?
You know what? I was like, he died before I got into music, and I wouldn't know because I just wasn't around. I didn't get that feeling at the time.
No, I'm just saying, like like if you could just imagine. I mean, a band like a guy like Jim Morrison or even Jimi Hendrix, had they lived, what kind of music would they have been making into their 40s, if at all?
Yeah, you'd assume that Hendrix would have taken advantage of all the studio advances, which
Probably.
he didn't really see.
Yeah. I mean, imagine something in the 1980s with Jimi Hendrix in it. Yeah.
Or even a couple of years later with the 16 track.
True. Yeah, 72, something like that. Yeah, that's true. All right, so what do you say, Rob?
Guys, another excellent job, man. Thank you, Ron, for the info and the input and seeing Slade when they were out there. You were very knowledgeable. You brought a lot of things to the table, and you know how Mike talks about everything. He knows a lot of information also.
It's a good show.
Thank you.
I really thought that, you know what, Slade, guys that they had like 6 number 1 and guys that had multiple hits on the chart, they were probably one of the most best British glam bands that you had, glam rock bands.
I mean,
I was going to say
they were just gigantic. 72, 73.
What do you say, Ron? I'm sorry.
They were just so popular in 72 and 73. I mean, just amazingly popular.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if. Did they outsell T-Rex?
What do you think? I don't think they did worldwide, but I think they did in the UK in the end. Slade actually didn't have too many huge hits around Europe, I don't believe.
But Slade, you know how many albums Slade sold? 50 million albums worldwide.
Yeah. So probably very similar to T-Rex. Amazingly popular Slade were.
Yeah.
I mean, T-Rex were the most popular band in the UK in 71 and in the first half of 72, and then Slade were the most popular band second half of 72, I think, and all throughout 73.
Right. Now, Slade was the second part of our glam trifecta that we're doing here on the Rock Show.
Yeah.
Last week was Sweet. This week was Slade, and next week we got Gary Glitter, and
that should be good.
That's going to be a good one.
That should be interesting.
Yep.
So to you guys, like we always say at the end of the show,
don't get drunk.
Get lumped up. Have a good one, guys. See you next week.
Thanks again, Ron.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.